Welcome, I'm Dawn Hayes. So excited to practice with you today. I have a sequence in mind that really brings focus and attention to the central axis of your body. It's what I think of as the core. I don't think of the core as like your outer abdominal muscles. I think of the core as like the inter-center line upon which we both move towards and away throughout the day. So I think you'll get an interesting glimpse of core today in your practice. Please, you'll find it helpful to have a block. If you don't have a block, you can use a blanket. We're going to start with a blanket covering at least half of your mat, or if you don't have a blanket, you can use a beach towel and cover the whole mat. And then lie onto your back and extend your legs out. Pause. And now start to arrange as if you're coming into mountain pose. So bring the inner big toes together. Bring your arms by your sides and squeeze everything towards the center. Your arms squeeze to the center, your buttocks squeezes up towards the center, your thighs squeeze down towards the center, even your face scrunches up. Pucker your lips, furrow your forehead and your eyebrows. Squeeze your eyelids, make everything super tight in towards the center, your abdominal muscles, anything you can actively squeeze. Hold it, breathe, squeeze more, and then let it go. Bring your arms and your legs out kind of like an X, making a bit of a C star shape. And can you soften everything you were just squeezing? What do you notice about the contrast of the squeezing in towards the midline and the moving away from your midline? And very slowly bring your legs so they're a little bit more towards the midline. Arms into a cactus shape. And slide your right heel out so it's stretching a little longer than your left leg. Relax your right leg, stretch your left heel out so it's reaching a little longer than your right leg. And do that side to side a few times. So they're pushing out through the heel, feeling the shift of your hips and your low back. This movement is such a great release for my low back, especially if I've been sitting a lot at the computer. And so notice how it affects one side and then the other side. The next time you push your right heel long, also reach your right arm overhead and slide it back into the cactus as leg relaxes. Now left heel, left arm, reach away from one another. As if you're trying to stretch your left arm and left leg as long as they can go. And do that side to side a few times. Inviting your ribs to move away from your hip bone on one side, and on the other side, inviting them to squeeze a little closer to one another. Alternating that movement pattern a few times. Notice where your attention naturally travels as you explore this reach. And then as you finish the next round on your left side, return to your arms out to the sides, but this time bend both knees so the soles of your feet are on the floor. And slowly tip both knees to one side, coming into windshield wipers. Return knees to center and tip knees to the other side. Return to center and do this a couple times. Moving slow enough that your movement lasts the full length of your breath. And that you can feel the different parts of the movement. Noticing if there's any areas that feel tender, next time your knees are in the center, interlace your fingers behind the back of your head, tip knees to one side, and slide your shoulders and your upper back to the other side. And do this a few times, letting elbows and head stay on the floor, but feeling them swoosh across to opposite side. As you go a couple rounds like this, I like to imagine that I'm a sea anemone. And just as you're moving, the tide is also moving you. You could imagine that your breath is the tide. And as you do one or two more rounds side to side here, inviting the spiral and noticing how it connects you and takes you away from your center. Next time you're in the center, pause there, drop your bones for a moment, and just check in. Then roll onto your side. It could be whichever side allows you to see the camera. And for me, that's the right side, but for you, it could be your left. And as you come onto your side, line yourself up with the back edge of your mat as if you were a ruler. If it's comfortable for your shoulder, have your arm underneath your head and stretching long overhead onto the floor. Now check in with your balance, bringing your top hand on top of your thigh. If you need assistance, you could use your tippy fingers on the floor like a little bit of a kickstand. Now experiment with reaching your top leg a little bit away from your bottom leg, but keep the heel at the same height or lower than your hip. So you don't want to go all the way up here like I'm showing now. Instead, keep it much closer to the Tadasana that you started with on your back. Then try as best you can to lift the bottom leg off the floor as well, so it's squeezing up to meet your top leg. Again, try to line up your inner heels, your inner knees, your tailbone, and the base of your skull as if you were doing mountain pose or Tadasana. And feel, are you rocking forward on that bottom thigh? Or are you rocking back on the bottom thigh? And would it be possible to find the center? Then with the legs slightly lifted, start to scissor your legs tiny bit. One foot forward, the other foot back. And then change so they switch positions. Almost like you're doing really tiny little kicks in water, but in slow motion. And notice how your body adapts to the different placements of your feet. And as you move in this way a couple more times, checking in with your breath. Also noticing how your torso is probably twisting a little bit, very subtly as your legs move a little forward and backward. And then the next time you're in the center, hover there for a moment, zip your legs together, keep hovering your bottom leg off the floor, and see if you can feel your inner thighs towards one another. And then when you're ready, slowly roll onto your back. Pause there for a moment and drop your bones. Notice the difference between your two sides. What does one side feel like? Is there more warmth on one side than the other side? Or a feeling of tingling or pulsation? When you're ready, roll onto your second side, so whichever one that is for you. If it's comfortable for your shoulder, have your arm under your head so you're making a ruler with your body, having everything stretch out long and parallel with the long edge of your mat. When you feel ready, take your top hand to the thigh. So as you lift that leg, you'll start to feel the musculature underneath your hand engage. Keeping that same alignment cue from the first side in mind here, where the heel stays the height of the hip and stays kind of low. Then when you're ready, whoo, makes me wobbly on this side. Bring your bottom foot up to meet the top leg and see if you can find Tadasana here. And for me today, this side is much more difficult to balance on. Are you noticing any differences as well? Maybe you're lucky and you got the hard side out of the way. As you squeeze towards the midline, can you find the Tadasana, the mountain pose? This pose is also called Samastitihi. And Samastitihi translates as equal standing. So can you equalize? So you're between the front and the back on that bottom hip. Can you equalize so your legs are lined up with the spine from inner heel to inner knee to base of tailbone to base of skull? From here, can you keep this awareness of your midline and start to scissor legs, one leg a little forward, one leg a little backward? Go in slow motion. Smaller is going to make this a little easier, so you can exaggerate it only so much as it feels good to you. Keep both legs floating off the floor, and keep both legs as close to your central axis, the midline, as you can. Ooh, and I know we haven't stood up yet, but I think you'll find this is some sneaky core work. You might also notice how your shoulders, your rib basket are twisting a little bit to accommodate the movement of the legs. This is a very normal and helpful adaptation that your body creates. Ooh, and then when you're ready, you feel even on this side, roll onto your belly. As you come onto your belly, rest your forehead on your hands for just a moment. And notice difference between right side and left side. Is there more heat or tingling on one side? And then when you're ready, press your forearms down in front of your chest. So your hands are stacked. Inhale, lift your chest, lift your legs for Shalabhasana, the locust pose. Spread your toes, widen bones of feet. Exhale, lower back to the floor. Repeat that a couple times. Inhale, lift chest and head and legs. Exhale, lower down, forehead and feet come back to earth. Do that a few more rounds at your own pace. Noticing the inhale, the exhale, your breath. And then as you finish the one you're on, pause for a moment on your belly. And when you're ready, slowly lift into table position, hands and knees. Fold up your blanket, set it to the side, and come into downward facing dog. In your downward facing dog, lift and lower your heels a few times, pumping action in feet and legs. Paw your hands on the floor, lifting one hand at a time off the earth, feeling a little bit of activity through shoulders. And when you're ready, walk your feet to meet your hands. As you come to the top of your mat, inhale, lift torso halfway. Exhale, fold, bending your knees. Bring your chin to your chest. Lengthen back of your neck. Press into your feet. Inhale, reach your arms out and up, extending for the ceiling. Exhale, arms by your sides. Samastitihi. So here's where if you have something to squeeze in between your thighs, you'll want to grab it. So it could be a block, like so. If you don't have a block, something like a sweatshirt or a rolled up blanket could also work. So you can take it like that, right? So anything that works good for you that you have. With the block between your thighs, squeeze in as if you're, again, drawing legs towards one another. Inhale, bend your knees, come into the chair pose. Exhale, return to standing. Do this a few times. Inhale, chair pose. Exhale, return to standing. Keep flowing on your breath, allowing your breath to begin a tiny bit before the movement does. So there's a little pause where you hover in the chair pose before you start to exhale. And there's a little pause where you hover in the Tadasana before you start to inhale. We'll do one or two more of these, allowing the flow of your breath to lead you into and out of your movements. The next time you're in the chair, pause there. Keep pushing through the feet, squeezing your block. Exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana. Inhale, lift your torso, slide your hands towards your knees so you're about parallel to the floor. Exhale, tiptoe your feet back behind you, squeezing your block as you come into downward facing dog. Inhale, squeeze the block, come into a plank position. Exhale, downward facing dog. Do this a few more times, squeezing the block between your thighs, hugging into plank. Return to down dog on your exhale. Follow the same principle you did in the chair pose, where your breath begins a couple seconds before you start to move, which will give you an opportunity to hover a little bit at each end of the range of movement. The next time you're in the plank pose, hover there, squeeze the block. Inhale, bring your hips a little towards the floor for upward facing dog. And exhale, downward facing dog. Inhale, plank, squeeze the block. Inhale, upward facing dog, pushing hands into earth. Exhale, downward facing dog. Repeat this a couple more times. So you're doing a vinyasa without chaturanga, pushing hands into the floor, moving from a plank to an up dog, and back to down dog. Last one, up dog, back to down dog. Pause in your down dog for a couple seconds, pressing into hands, clawing your nails into the floor. Now tiptoe or hop your feet to meet your hands with the block between your legs. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, fold, Uttanasana, chin to chest. Push through your feet, reach for the sky. Exhale, arms by your sides. You can set the block to the side. This time, if it works for you, bring your big toes to touch. So you're squeezing the legs together, but they're more narrow. And I'm suggesting this because it's something different, not because I think you should do it this way all the time. So with the inner big toes coming together, inhale, chair pose, feeling the squeeze of the legs. Exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana. Inhale, lift halfway, hands towards knees. Tiptoe your way back, and with your big toes touching, find your way into downward facing dog. Inhale into plank with big toes squeezing together. Can you hug your inner ankles towards one another and your inner knees together? Either straight legs or knees to the floor. Lower down chaturanga in slow motion. Inhale, cobra. Exhale, downward facing dog. Again, have big toes touching. Inhale, reach your right leg up towards the ceiling. Make some circles with your right foot and ankle. Go the other direction. Exhale, step your right foot between your hands. How would it be for you today to do a high lunge as if you were on a balance beam? You can keep your hands on the floor. So you'll have, instead of a hip distance apart, your back foot will be right behind your front foot. Optional, lift your torso, arms by your ears. Now, I'm expecting this to be wobbly. And an extra, I'm sorry if you're on carpet, because that's already going to make it wobbly. So do what you need to do. If you want to go wider, go wider. If you want to experiment with this narrow stance, try it out. On your exhale, lower hands to the floor. Step back to downward facing dog. Inner big toes together. Inhale, plank. Exhale, slow motion chaturanga, either straight legs or knees to the floor. Inhale, cobra or up dog. And exhale, bring big toes back together for downward facing dog. Inhale, reach your left leg for three-legged dog. Make circles with your ankle. So it's the ankle joint that rotates, not the hip or the knee. Go the other direction with the ankle. Circles. On your exhale, step forward. Pretend you're on a balance beam like a gymnast and have your front foot directly in front of your back foot and lift up through torso, through arms, if you choose. If your balance would like more support, you can keep your hands on the floor and offer yourself more steadiness. Now for this pose today, I have my front leg a little bit higher because I feel like it's a little bit easier for me to balance. If I came lower, it would be a bit more demanding on my back leg. So as you find your steadiness, your power, checking in with what it feels like to be on a tightrope or a balance beam for high lunge. Exhale, hands to the floor. Step back to downward facing dog. This time, like we did that starfish shape a while ago, bring your feet out so they're on the edges of your mat. And let's have pinky toes off the edge, but big toes on the mat. Inhale into plank position and check in what it feels like to have the legs wide apart here. Again, feet are mat width, but hands are shoulder distance. Good. Come back to downward facing dog. If it works for you, take both hands off the mat and both feet off the mat. So now you're making a star shape again. I'm going to turn so you can see me from the front. You have wide hands, wide feet. Inhale into plank pose with wide hands, wide feet. So part of getting to know the midline is moving away from it. So here, both your feet and your hands are moving away from the midline and you're coming into the plank position. Exhale back to down dog. Walk hands shoulder distance, feet hip distance. Lift heels, look forward. Exhale, step or hop, feet to meet hands. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, fold in towards your legs, towards the floor. Inhale, reach for the sky, Urdhva Hastasana. Exhale, arms by your sides, Samastitihi. Pause. Take a breath for nothing. It might feel like a bit of a sigh. You could even rest hands and feel into your heartbeat and heart rate. Then releasing hands, bring big toes together once again. If this works for you. If it doesn't, you can always go more wide with feet. Now with hands on hips or out in space, slowly lift your heels off the floor like you're on a pair of stilettos and your inner feet are hugging towards one another. Slowly lower heels back to the floor. Repeat that a couple more times. Heels slowly lift off the floor. Heels slowly lower back to the earth. Is it possible to keep inner ankles hugging towards one another as you lift up? Now this round, how would it be for you to bend your knees, keeping your heels lifted and coming into a chair pose with your inner legs, inner ankles squeezing together? Ooh, feet are working hard, legs are working quite a bit as well. Now, keeping your heels lifted, could you bring your tippy fingers to the floor? And with your heels lifting high, start to extend the back of your legs. Then lower heels to floor, fold in towards your legs. Inhale, lift torso parallel to earth, hands towards knees. Exhale, downward facing dog. This time, let's do hip distance with feet in down dog. Inhale, come forward into plank. Now lean both shoulders to the right. Lean both shoulders to the left. I'll turn towards camera again so you can see what I mean. Tip to one side. Tip to the other side. Try that a couple times. Leaning into each side. Back to downward facing dog. You might find it helpful to have a block here, so feel free to have it at the front of your mat. With feet hip distance apart, inhale, lift your right leg up towards the ceiling in three-legged dog. Exhale, step your right foot forward between your hands. This time, keep your feet hip distance apart. Take your left hand onto the block or onto the floor and twist your right shoulder over your left. Check in with what this feels like for you. I recommend bringing your block a little higher for today. And as you turn, can you scissor your legs towards one another as if your back foot was on a blanket and you were trying to pull the feet towards one another? Now, as you're here, could you float your bottom hand off the block and lift your torso into a revolved high lunge? Then bring your hand back towards the block, lift back up. Now, this time you might be able to bring your block a little lower, so you lightly touch tippy finger to the block and lift back up. If that works relatively well, you can take top hand to hip, you can bring the block a little lower, or even go towards the floor into this lifting and lowering, finding rotation in spine, finding the tracking down through that left hand, and then lifting up using legs and torso. Next time you lift up, reach your arms out to the sides, and on exhale, windmill downward facing dog, hands to floor. Optional vinyasa, checking in with your breath. You can do any combination of stillness and movement for a vinyasa that helps you connect to your body. One of my favorites is the squatting position, also called malasana. Child's pose is a common option. Cat-cow can also work really well. Ultimately, do what works best for you. And then from wherever you are, join us in downward facing dog. We'll do the second side. Inhale, reach your left leg into three-legged dog. Exhale, step forward for high lunge. Have feet hip distance apart for balance. Take your block underneath your front hand, the right one. Take left hand to left hip and turn. Imagine your back foot is on a blanket and you're trying to your feet towards one another. Like you're gonna pull the legs together like a pair of scissors. Then, if it works for you, float up into a revolved high lunge and float back down. Now, if your block seems a little high, You can experiment with bringing it a little lower. And when you move through a bigger range, you strengthen a little bit more of the musculature of the hip and your torso. So as you lift and lower a few times, notice where you're feeling this action. And how does it change what you feel if you bend a little bit more deeply through the front leg? And next time you lift up, reach your arms out in that wide-armed position. And like a big windmill, exhale, spin hands to floor, downward facing dog. Check in with your breath and explore any combination of stillness and movement. Maybe you do chaturanga. Maybe you find your way from plank to upward facing dog, like we did earlier. We'll all meet in downward facing dog. From your downward facing dog, lift your heels, look to your hands, step or hop feet to meet hands. Inhale, lift halfway. Exhale, fold. Inhale, reach for the sky. Exhale, arms by your sides. Remember to the X shape that you did at the beginning of practice today on your back. Bend your knees as if you're coming into a chair pose. Bring your arms out to the sides like that X. Bring one leg out to the side and make that X tip a little bit over. Oh, and then switch sides. Keep your standing leg bent like chair pose as you tip your way into this wide C-star shape. And do it again on each side. Bending the standing leg, moving away from the midline. How's that feeling for you today? Back to center once you've done same number on both sides. Exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana. We're going to move through the vinyasa, so you might arrange yourself to step back to downward facing dog. Again, your choice, plank, any combination of stillness and movement that gives you a chance to really check in, to come back to center, to midline. And we'll meet in downward facing dog. From your downward facing dog, inhale, reach your right leg up towards the ceiling. Exhale, step your right foot forward between your hands. Feel how it is to be on your tightrope or the balance beam. Inhale, lift your torso, high lunge. Pause for just a moment. Now transition into warrior two. You might have to adjust your feet for warrior two since you started in the tightrope. And what would it be like to pause here for just a moment? If I were to ask you to hold it for 30 seconds, how would that feel to you today? And as you settle in, would you be able to go a little deeper through that front leg? Could you feel the way the torso turns a little bit away from the front leg, but the hips turn a little bit towards the front leg? And can you allow that natural pattern to support you here? On your next inhale, straighten your front leg, reach your torso over the front leg, and exhale into Trikonasana. You can take top hand to hip if you want. Bottom hand can be on a block as it's helpful for you. Now look to the floor. And if you remember back to what you did in that revolved high lunge, could you hover the bottom hand in space? So you're not using it to support your torso, possibly reaching your top arm up towards the ceiling. Now imagine that you're a puppet and there's a string attached to the top arm, and it's pulling you up so that your torso can float. Now, I wish it was really just a string holding you up, but you'll feel your legs and your torso are doing lots of work here. When you're ready, in slow motion, lift back up with your torso. Exhale, bend your front knee. Both hands inside your front foot for downward facing dog. From your downward facing dog, any combination of stillness and movement. Giving yourself a chance to sense and feel your midline, your central axis, and how right and left side probably feel different now since you've done one side and not the other. From your downward facing dog, check in for a moment. Take a breath for nothing. We'll do the second side. Inhale, reach left leg up towards the ceiling, three-legged dog. Exhale, giant step forward, left foot between hands. Line your feet up like you're on a balance beam or a tightrope. Lift your torso, arms by your ears. Check in with that action for just a moment. When you're ready, spin back heel to the ground, turning chest open, warrior two. Now, could you hold warrior two for 30 seconds? As you find steadiness here, how low can you go in your front thigh and still maintain that feeling of inner strength and support? As you're feeling heat build, generally you'll find these postures, when you hold them, are very warming. When you're ready, straighten your front leg, reach your front arm into the Trikonasana. If it's helpful, you can use the block. If you remember back to what you did in the revolved lunge and on the other side, experiment with hovering your bottom hand, your left hand in space. I like to imagine that someone is pulling me up through the top arm, and as I reach with the top arm, it helps to use the right side of the body to create length in the left side. So I'm not trying to push my way off the floor with the left leg. Well, still doing that. It's just helped by pulling away from the floor with the top side. As you take another couple seconds here, really press into the heels. Inhale, slow motion, lift your torso upright. Exhale, bend your front knee for warrior two. And windmill hands to floor for downward facing dog. Optional vinyasa or any combination of stillness and movement. Checking in with what you're noticing and feeling. And then we'll meet in Malasana in the squatting position. If that doesn't work for you, please do something else that does. So you'll find your way to the back of your mat and check in for a moment. However you arrange yourself, take a peek at the camera because I'm going to demonstrate our next setup. So we'll do this 2 rounds. The first round, you'll start in downward facing dog. You'll move towards plank pose, but you'll stop before you get there. Now your feet will stay about hip distance apart, and you'll turn to the pinky edge of one foot and the big toe edge of the other foot. And then like you're on the balance beam, the toes of your right foot will point to the heel of your left foot, and you'll lift into Vashisthasana. Now on the first round, you're going to push through the inner edge of one foot and you're going to float the other foot off the floor. So it's really going to work your inner leg in a powerful way. So when you're ready, we'll go ahead and move through that. So walk your hands back, stand into Uttanasana. So from your Malasana, Straighten your legs. Walk your hands forward into downward facing dog. Take a breath for nothing. Move shoulders a little bit towards your wrists, but stop before you get there. Turn onto the pinky edge of your right foot. Rotate your big toe edge of your left foot to the floor. Push through both feet. Lift your left arm up towards the sky. If it's helpful, you can be on your right forearm. Now push through the big toe of your left foot and hover your right leg off the floor, zipping up towards the ceiling with that right leg. Bring the right foot back to floor, come into your downward facing dog again. Take a breath for nothing. We'll do the second side. Roll onto the pinky edge of your left foot, the big toe edge of your right foot. Lift your right arm off the floor for Vashisthasana. Push through your right foot, hover your left leg off the floor. It's more challenging if you keep your left leg straight, but do as it works for you. Bend your knee if you need. When you're ready, back to downward facing dog. Woo, and the knees to floor. Come into child's pose or malasana. And check in with what that feels like for you. Take a breath for nothing. And then take a deep inhale through your nose. And exhale with a little sigh. When you're ready, come back to the malasana or some shape that you can watch another demo. So this one we're going to play around with kind of like the triangle shape, but in Vashisthasana. So you might start with your hands in that shoulder distance apart setup. You'll come towards plank again, but this time you're going to roll onto the pinky edge of one foot and you're going to stack the other foot on top of it. And that might be plenty for today. Then if you want, you can bring your foot to your inner thigh, or even start to reach it up towards the ceiling. It's up to you. So when you're ready, come back into the Uttanasana from your Malasana. Walk your hands forward into downward facing dog. Either on your hands, or if your wrists want something different, you can come onto your forearms. I'll show it on my forearms for this one. Come towards the plank position. Rotate onto the pinky edge of your right foot. Stack the left foot on top and zip the legs together. Optional, bring your top foot to the inner thigh. Also optional, reach your top heel up towards the ceiling. And then when you're ready, step your way out. Downward facing dog. Second side. Again, you could be on your forearms or your hands as you prefer. Come to pinky edge of left foot. Stack right foot on top. Lift right arm away from the floor. Optional, bring your top foot to inner thigh. Optional, reach your top leg towards the ceiling. Back to downward facing dog. And then once again, child's pose. Knees to floor. Hips to heels. Forehead rests towards the earth. Soak in your breath and notice what's obvious. What's more subtle. And if that big sigh sounds like a good idea, do that now. When you're ready, slither forward onto your belly. So I'd like to work with a little bit of a core move here that helps to bring awareness to front, sides, and back. So if you don't have a lot of space in your room, what you'll want to do is bring one side to the very edge of your mat, and then you'll do the first side of the pose 3 or 4 times, or maybe 5, and then you'll switch and do the other side. If you have enough room to kind of roll back and forth, you could do it that way, but I think just to keep it simple, I'll teach it one side and then the other. So have your right side all the way on the edge of your mat so you can roll to your left. Now, start with your arms by your sides. If you want to watch the first round, go ahead. Inhale, lift into Shalabhasana. Then roll to your left. And come into Navasana. Then roll back to your left and come into Shalabhasana. Can you do it without using your hands to push you away from the floor? That's round 2, back to Navasana. Back to Shalabhasana. Here's round 3. Back to Navasana. Return to the Shalabhasana and rest. Now let's try the other side. So I'm going to turn my head on my mat so you can still see me roll towards you. But you can stay where you are and just move so your left side is all the way on the mat. Like you did in the first one, inhale into Shalabhasana. Roll over without using your hands and come into Navasana. Trying as best you can not to let your legs or torso touch, or arms touch the floor. Back to the Shalabhasana, keeping arms and legs off the floor. Roll to the right into the Navasana. It's round 2. We've got one more. One. Back to your belly with control. Lower down. And then when you're ready, roll over onto your back. Have your knees bent and the soles of your feet on the floor. You can rest hands on your torso and check in. My heart's beating pretty quick. I would guess that yours is too. Could you take that full heart rhythm into a bridge pose? Pushing through your feet, lifting chest and front body up towards the sky by creating strength through your back body. As you push your feet into the earth, imagine your feet are on a blanket and you're trying to pull the blanket towards your shoulders. Notice that your breath rhythm is probably still a little bit raspy or a little bit wispy because of that last pose and series you did. When you're ready, slowly lower back to the earth. Pause. Take a breath for nothing. Grab your block and slide it between your inner thighs. So it can be on its skinny way, or you can have it on its middle way. Remember all the work that you did today to hug the midline. Squeeze the block, push into your feet, and lift into the bridge pose again. Imagine you're trying to pull your feet on the blanket towards your shoulders. And at the same time, you're squeezing the block firmly between your legs. Could you hold here for another 20 to 30 seconds? How would that feel for you today? When you're ready, slowly roll your spine down one vertebra at a time. Set your block to the side. Pause and check in. Last round, walk your inner feet and inner knees to touch. Your heels will stay about an inch or so apart, but as much as you can, try to keep the inner leg zipped together and lift into a low to moderate bridge pose. So you won't get as much lift in your ribs, but your legs are going to work in a really unique way that is valuable and challenging. So keep squeezing inner knees together, inner ankles towards one another. Feel what happens in your legs as you try to lift your hips a little bit away from the floor. Then slowly lower down. Walk your feet wide and do a couple rounds of the windshield wipers. Inviting the rotation across the midline again. And noticing what that feels like for you. Then next time your knees are in the center, walk your feet about hip distance apart. Roll onto one side, whichever side allows you to face the camera or your device. Have your knees in front of your hips. So you're in a fetal position. Now, whichever side you're laying on, that's the bottom leg. Keep that knee where it is and stretch the top leg with the knee bent back behind you. And then depending on how it feels for you, you can move the bottom arm perhaps back behind you as you try to turn the top chest a little bit towards the front knee, towards your bottom knee. As you turn that top chest towards the floor, you're turning your forehead and the bottom chest towards the floor as well. So it's a twist here on your belly. Now, my top knee is uncomfortable here if I try to put that top foot on the floor, so I let it float in space. But notice what it's like to reach the top leg back behind you. It's a little bit of a back bend. And at the same time, turn your rib basket towards the floor. In a way, this is like the high lunge with twist you did in the practice. Then when you're ready, unravel your arms, roll onto your back. Pause there for just a moment. Roll onto your second side. So whichever one you haven't done, be in the fetal position where your knees are tucked up towards or in front of your hips. Now, whichever leg is on the floor, keep that leg in front of you on the floor with knees bent. Whichever leg is towards the sky, start to stretch it back behind you, keeping the knee bent. And as you do that, notice how that impacts the belly on that top side, the quadricep on the top side. As it feels good to you, you can unravel the bottom arm back behind you and unravel the top arm and chest out towards the floor, towards the bottom leg, the one that's on your outer hip on the floor. And the chest turns a bit towards the earth, even as your top leg reaches back behind you. And then feel the feels, wherever they are for you. When you're ready, unravel onto your back once again with knees bent and feet on the floor. Do a couple rounds of spinal undulation. 1. Inhale, tilt your tailbone into the floor so your ribs arc a little bit away from the earth. Exhale, press your front body and back body down towards the floor as you scoop your tailbone towards your knees. Do that a few times. Inhale, tilt your tailbone into the floor, feeling your middle, back, and ribs arc towards sky. Exhale, press middle ribs from the front to the back, to the floor, and scoop your tailbone towards your knees. Do a few more of these. Eventually, allow this movement to come to a natural completion and set yourself up for Shavasana. As you set up for Shavasana, you're welcome to use a blanket or even a chair under your legs as support. Noticing what it feels like to come to the earth. And then remember what we began with today and bring your inner legs together for Tadasana. Zip your arms to your sides and tighten and scrunch everything you can scrunch, including your face. Squeeze harder, more towards the center. Scrunch it all up. Anything you can gather actively in. And then let it all soften to the floor. Into Shavasana. gradually rest your hands on your torso. Bend your knees and tuck them up towards your belly, rolling to either side. Push your arms into the earth to use your bones to lift up. And taking a seat, bring your palms together in front of your heart. In the yoga tradition, they have many names for the midline of the body. The Sushumna, the Mahanadi, the Surya Nadi, and the list goes on. So as you close your practice today, take a little bow forward. Offer yourself gratitude for the discipline and dedication that you demonstrated in showing up today for your practice. And also bowing in towards that center, towards the depth that is inside you. That becomes a place of strength and steadiness, not only physically, but also mentally, emotionally, and potentially also spiritually in your life. I thank you for sharing your practice with us today. It's such an honor to be here with you. Thank you.